Today we are talking about Achilles. When Achilles was released, he was most certainly not the most balanced god. He had some serious problems in regards to especially his one Shield of Achilles, which would deal a massive amount of damage at close range, had a way too long stun, and also had very high damage at a longer, large cone range. In the most recent patch, a patch 5.4, Achilles received some nerfs. First of all, his Shield of Achilles was nerfed. The damage was decreased from 100 to 340 to 80 to 300, with no changes to the scaling. At the same time, the stun duration was decreased from 1.1 to 1.5 seconds to 1 second at all ranks. His combat dodge was also nerfed, the cooldown was increased from 10 to 12 seconds. Initially, upon seeing those nerfs, I thought they would have hardly any impact at all. A little bit of base damage gone throughout all ranks wouldn't affect Achilles, and he would just be in the exact same place as before. After having tested him after the patch, I can't say that I still am of that opinion, but not only because of the one. So in terms of the one interesting thing that happened is his clear got significantly slowed down by taking away a little bit of early base damage. That means in terms of jungle clear, he's not the absolute monster that he was before anymore. He's just a fast clearing jungler basically, but when his one is down, then he also doesn't have the best clear, because he can only proc his 3 combat dodge once unless he hits a guard. But is clear alone enough to significantly take down the character? Probably not. So we need to look at the rest. The stun duration decrease is good, but I don't think it has a very large impact from what I've felt so far. You are still easily able to hit multiple targets in a team fight with your stun. You can still interrupt various engages and other things, so the stun duration really doesn't matter that much compared to the fact that he does have an instant 1 second stun. For pure lockdown and especially peel, there are most certainly better characters, but those were already the case before. He is more of a backline diving god, and he only needs to get CC on one target and get all of his damage off on that target. The nerf to combat dodge is something that I could barely feel. Yes, it's 2 more seconds, but the cooldown was incredibly short beforehand, and with cooldown reduction it's still super short anyways. And the big deal with combat dodge is that you can use it twice already anyways. It's not so much that you will need it more than 2 times in a fight, and with 12 seconds cooldown that is typically still possible anyways, unless you get bursted very quickly, especially since Achilles can also go into more tankier build options. The big deal with his 3 at the moment is actually something completely different, and that's, in my opinion, the biggest nerf that has happened this patch, along with his clearing nerf. Essentially, what happened to his 3 is that you can now use the dash, and sometimes you will be able to use your throw afterwards. That's following in the ability. Sometimes you will use a basic attack if you hold down the mouse. This part can be prevented by just clicking after you use the dash, but sometimes neither will work and you will just have to press the ability button again. So if you're playing Achilles for the first or second time after this patch, you'll probably just struggle with the fact that his 3 is absolutely glitched and you will not get off the damage that you're expecting in the right situation, and you will not get the reset, and you will not be able to close the distance to a target again and things like that. You can kinda get used to just using the ability button all the time, and that way you can prevent that and then he plays like before, but that's a bit of an adjustment period, and that's actually what I felt was his biggest problem right now. What's interesting is how much a rather small nerf had of an overall impact on how the character plays. Now previously with Achilles you would go on a single target and you would kill them. That was what you were gonna do. You were gonna stun them and you were gonna kill them with your 3 and you execute. That is often no longer possible. It can still be possible, but in many situations you will not be able to get enough damage off. That little bit of base damage really makes a difference here. I still think that his dash, combat dodge, still has too much damage if you had 2 instances of it, because it's still a combined 450 base damage with 100% scaling, but still, even that damage often doesn't suffice. Instead, you will be a lot more focused around getting AoE damage off. His 1 has a massive amount of damage in the cone still, that hasn't changed much at all, and as such, hitting that on a whole team will always have a drastic impact, just because of the poke that you're doing to everyone at once. Achilles gets some more significant downsides though. Especially in solo, you will not have as much pressure early on. Without the high damage potential from his one from previously and the stun, his potential in solo as a lane bully goes down a fair bit. I played a match against another high pressure solo, a Kukulin today, and while I built the wrong blessing, that doesn't really do anything for the damage and the pressure, but more for the health that I'm losing myself. And I found myself having a relatively hard time getting my clear off and getting pressure on the enemy in comparison to what a Kukulin was capable of. Now, obviously a Kukulin is a very high pressure god, but Achilles now seems to transition way more towards mid and late game, especially when it comes to solo. In jungle it's not quite the same story, but in solo your impact isn't there at the start if the enemy has a fair bit of defense. You just won't chunk through that, you don't have the craziest sustain in lane, you have decent sustain but not super high, and your bully potential outside of year 1 is also not that high. Even if you use the combat dodge with the reset to both clear and poke a little bit at the same time. In the jungle, your ganks are definitely still strong with the setup that you have and the high kill potential through the execute as well, but they're also not quite as strong as before. I think Achilles is still overtuned, don't get me wrong here. I think especially his power values, his scaling is very good, very strong on the 3, and that should probably take a bit of a hit in order to make him a little more balanced, a little more in the middle of the field. And I think a major contributing factor to that is that both his passive as well as his 2 are heavily synergizing in terms of either power increase or protection increase. Between the power and the movement speed or the protection bonus and the health bonus, his passive pretty much gives him a free extra item, which can be especially useful if you're building towards defense and want some more damage at the end of the game or the other way around. And being able to amplify that even more seems a little bit strange to me, because if in late game you're able to get some pots or some buffs and a little bit of power, then with your passive and your 2, you can have a very high power number without having invested much into power at all and still having the same defense values. I think in regards to his execute, Achilles was actually overrated. It can be used effectively in some situations, but in many situations enemies are able to avoid or even juke it, and it's not quite as dangerous as an Ao Kuang or Thanatos execute seems, because even body blocking will stop it. Another thing with Achilles is that he's really not that hard to play. His 1 is very easy to hit, and even the stun part is relatively easy to hit. His 2 doesn't even need to be hit at all. And if you pay a little bit of attention, then you will have no problems hitting his 3 in most situations either, as you're not dependent on some sort of timing, you can just throw the spear whenever. And the same with the ultimate, as long as you're aware that you can cancel it and use it a little bit later to execute the next target after executing someone, you're pretty much set. With that much simplicity, it's no wonder that Achilles will initially shine a lot, because it really doesn't take that much to learn him and play him very well. At the same time, you will see insanely high damage output numbers at the end of the game from an Achilles, no matter how he builds. And that is, alongside with the passive on the 2, due to his 1. My biggest issue with the 1 is that no matter what range you hit a target at, it still gets 80% of its damage. And I think that is way too much. I think this ability should have a distance scaling, same as Gap's 2 does, the shockwave, so the further away a target is, the less damage they take. That would lead to some problems with its clear, so maybe this should only apply to gods and not minions. But for gods, especially in teamfight, it seems somewhat unreasonable to have them be very far away from him at the very end and the corner of the targeter, and still taking 80% of the damage, considering the target is literally 50 units in range and a very wide cone, similar to other gods' ultimates. Alongside with that, either his passive or his 2 could be nerfed a little bit, just to take his extra power or defense that he gets, while not necessarily building any of it down a bit. It doesn't have to be drastically lowered, because it's obviously one of the perks of the god, but take it down a notch so it's a bit more even. Maybe also the movement speed and bonus health in that context. Last but not least, I would propose taking away a little bit of the damage and scaling on the combat dodge. As long as it's so easy to confirm the second proc of it, it's actually a very high damaging ability on a relatively low cooldown. As it stands, you would almost never contemplate keeping your combat dodge open as an escape, because it's just so much more effectively used as an aggressive dash with a reset than it is as an escape tool. And as such, I don't think it really needs these high damage values that actually are higher than his 1 overall. By taking away a little bit of his stat safety nets, a little bit of his AoE damage that really isn't that fitting for a warrior in the first place outside of an ultimate, and a little bit of his single target damage through the combat dodge, I think Achilles could be put in line much better with the rest of the gods, without severely hindering his potential to do what he does or making him completely useless, and without further reducing his clear by much. And with that, thank you very much for watching. I hope this was interesting and insightful. Leave your opinion in the comments down below. Let me know what you think, how Achilles could be put better in place with others, or if you think he's completely fine already. If you're new to the channel, feel free to hit the sub button and make the bell, it really helps me out. See you for the next one tomorrow. DukeSloth, out. So I actually figured out my demonetization issue, and it was my outro. As such, feel free to click any of the links around here right now. There will be new outro music as soon as I find something nice. Until then, as you guys requested, I will do the outro music myself. You're welcome.